Have you ever stopped to think that maybe the part of you that scares you the most is actually the one that can heal you the most? There is a side of you that you've learned to hide, to silence, to avoid. And the more you run from it, the more it feels like something inside you tightens, like it's trapped in a body that wants to scream but can't. The truth is, the salvation you've been searching for might be hidden exactly where you refuse to look. And the most curious thing, that's no coincidence. Carl Jung warned us about the hidden aspects of the psyche, and perhaps the greatest one is the fear of seeing ourselves in the mirror with no filters. The fear of facing what we label as weak, ugly, or even dangerous. But what if this shadow isn't the monster you imagine, and is actually the guardian of your freedom? There's something about this that almost no one realizes, something most people are afraid to uncover. And that's what we're going to explore today. But not in the usual way. You won't get ready-made answers, because in this video you're not just a spectator, you're part of the discovery. And if you stay until the end, you might see yourself with new eyes. Or better yet, you might finally feel who you truly are. What we do not face in ourselves, we will meet as fate. Carl Jung. Have you ever wondered why every time you're about to take a bigger step, something pulls you back? There's a silent force working behind the scenes of the soul. And it shows up when we're on the edge of expansion. At first glance, fear seems like protection, but in truth, it's a disguise for the prison that blocks us from accessing our true power. It's not the outside world that builds the walls around us. We are the ones who create the invisible barriers. That fear has a hidden name: rejection. Because to grow, to expand, to take up more space, means to risk being seen. It means no longer pleasing everyone. It means saying, my feminine essence, my power, my light deserve to exist. And that's scary, because we were taught to fit in, not to overflow. Picture a flower growing in a pot that's too small. Its roots twist, its strength weakens, its light fades. And yet, it keeps trying to grow, even if it hurts. Because expansion isn't a decision made by the mind, it's a calling from the soul. But here's what most people don't understand. This calling doesn't scream, it whispers. It shows up as restlessness, insomnia, emptiness. And the more you ignore it, the more it disguises itself as frustration, fatigue, self-sabotage. Because your essence knows you're meant for more, but you still don't believe it, and so you hesitate. You shrink yourself. You hide behind logical excuses, urgent commitments, inherited fears, and every time you do that, something inside you falls asleep. And that's how fear wins, not when it screams, but when you silently feed it. But there's one detail that changes everything. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. How many times have you been on the verge of a breakthrough, and then inexplicably took a step back? Self-sabotage is cunning. It doesn't show up as an enemy, but as a concerned friend. It whispers familiar advice. Now's not the time. You're not ready. What if it goes wrong? But behind that caution lies an old pact with fear, a silent agreement we made not to get hurt again, because at some point trying became painful, dreaming left scars, showing up came at a cost. And ever since, we've learned to protect whatever still pulses inside us. In this light, self-sabotage isn't weakness. It's emotional survival. It's like an armor we wear without noticing, forging excuses with the skill of a master. But that protection comes at a high price. Because every time we stop ourselves from moving forward, we also distance ourselves from our essence, from the brilliance of our creative power, from the expansion that invites us to live in fullness. And the more this barrier repeats itself, the more it solidifies. until we become prisoners of our own fear. The feminine essence suffers even more under this weight, because it carries in its intuition the urgency of expression. But at the same time, it's taught to be quiet, to adapt, to be accepted before being authentic. And in this invisible tug of war between protection and freedom, the soul cries out for wholeness. While the mind fears being wounded, what's most subtle is that we often don't even realize we're sabotaging ourselves. Procrastination looks like tiredness. Lack of focus seems like distraction. But deep down, there's an unnamed pain trying to keep us safe, even if that means holding back our growth. And that brings us to something even deeper. Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness, and the word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness. Carl Jung. There comes a moment when the soul gets tired of being ignored. It's when the repressed power begins to leak through the cracks of life, disguising itself as sudden irritability, unexplained sadness, an emptiness that just won't go away. This isn't weakness. It's strength held back for too long. It's life trying to remind you who you are, even if you've forgotten. Have you ever felt like you're carrying something bigger than you can contain? An energy that doesn't fit inside your body, a restlessness that pushes you beyond the familiar. That's your inner power knocking. But instead of opening the door, we often lock it, afraid of what it might unleash. Because confronting your own greatness requires courage. It demands breaking ancient pacts with emotional mediocrity. And that hurts, because repression has deep roots, built over years of fear, veiled criticism, self-sabotage masked as humility. We grew up hearing it was dangerous to shine too brightly. But what few realize is, denying that power doesn't protect us. It fragments us. We live as shadows of who we could be. And that disconnection becomes the breeding ground for silent suffering. Because deep down, in the quietest corner of our being, we know we're betraying something sacred, our deepest truth. Power isn't about ego, it's about essence. It's the capacity to live with presence, with purpose, with wholeness. It's the fire of expansion burning within. And when you try to put out that fire, it doesn't vanish. It burns you from the inside. In the form of anxiety, frustration, or illnesses modern medicine can't explain. But there comes a moment when everything shifts, the moment you stop running. When you face that power as part of yourself, not as an enemy, but as an ally. Not as a threat, but as an invitation. Because only those who look their shadow in the eye discover the light it holds. And then, a quiet but definitive choice arises. Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. Carl Jung. There is a kind of loneliness no one sees, the kind that lives in those who hide their own greatness for fear of not being accepted. It's strange how we grow used to fitting into spaces much smaller than we deserve. How we shape our words, our gestures, even our desires, just to avoid being too much. Because we've been conditioned to believe that the more authentic we are, the more likely we are to be rejected. So we silence our light and call it maturity. But embracing your own greatness is an act of quiet courage. It's not about being more than others. It's about being all that you are, even when that challenges expectations. It's an intimate confrontation where the fear of not belonging tries to bargain with the soul, and the soul in turn refuses to be broken apart. The feminine essence feels this even more deeply, because she carries within her the instinct to expand, yet was taught to shrink in order to be loved. Her light was not denied. It was reshaped, compressed, trimmed, and still she persists, because no amount of repression can destroy what was born to be free. This fear of rejection isn't new. It echoes old wounds, traumas inherited across generations. And that's why we often don't even understand why we're so afraid of being fully seen. We just feel it, as if existing in our wholeness were dangerous, as if being ourselves were too risky. But here's what few truly understand. Those who reject you for being whole were never ready for real love. Because loving someone in fragments is easy. Loving someone real takes soul. And when that truth hits you, something shifts inside. The need for approval gives way to the need for truth. And suddenly freedom becomes worth more than any conditional acceptance. Because in the end, the love that heals the most is the one that starts with you. And then a new door opens. He who looks outside dreams, but he who looks inside awakens. Carl Jung. True freedom doesn't begin when the world allows us to be. It begins when we stop asking for permission. To express yourself fully is a revolutionary act, not because it requires strength, but because it requires vulnerability. And that for many is scarier than fear itself. We were taught to control, to contain, to measure every gesture so as not to cross the invisible line of what is acceptable. But when you break that pattern, something powerful happens. Your body relaxes, your voice finds its tone, and your soul finally breathes. It's as if every cell recognizes the relief of existing without masks, of feeling without filters, of living without negotiating who you are. Full expression doesn't need an audience. It begins in the silence of someone who allowed themselves to feel, even without having the words. And it manifests in the small acts of authenticity that escape our control. A spontaneous laugh, an unexpected tear, a guiltless no. The feminine essence blooms in this very soil. She doesn't seek perfection. She seeks presence. And when she expresses herself fully, she doesn't just heal herself. She heals the world around her, because her energy doesn't follow logic. It pulses, it vibrates, it transforms. And that's precisely why it's been repressed so often, because it is untamable. Freedom isn't about doing everything. It's about being everything. Being light and shadow, intensity and calm, strength and surrender. And understanding that each of these aspects holds a sacred truth, one that deserves to be felt, spoken, and lived. There is no formula, no single path, only the now. And in this now, you get to choose to keep fitting in, or to finally begin overflowing. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung. All your life you believed you had to improve, to evolve, to heal. As if there was something in you that was broken. But in truth, what frightens you is not the pain. It's the truth the pain reveals. You avoided the part of you that screams for freedom because you were taught that being too whole could be dangerous. That feeling too much, dreaming too big, desiring too deeply, meant being too much. But what if what you call too much is exactly what the world needs the most? You're not afraid of your weakness. You're afraid of your power. Because power brings responsibility. It demands courage. It calls you to life. And life, when truly lived, doesn't accept half measures. You tried to protect yourself from rejection. But in the process, you rejected yourself. You built an armor to survive. But that same armor now keeps you from feeling, from loving, from expanding. And that's why even after all your achievements, the emptiness still lingers. Because what's missing isn't success. What's missing is you. And then everything makes sense. The version of you that you avoid the most is the only one that can save you. Because in her lives your freedom, in her pulses your feminine essence, in her lies the courage to break free from self-sabotage and allow finally the expansion. But are we ready to accept this? You no longer need to keep hiding. You no longer need to negotiate with fear or shrink yourself to fit into spaces that can no longer contain who you're becoming. Because the only version of you that can truly set you free is the one you were taught to avoid. And that's exactly why she's so powerful. She wasn't shaped to please. She was forged in shadow, nourished by pain, by rejection, by self-sabotage, but also by truth, by intuition, by essence, by the expansion that pulses in every cell of your being. This video was an invitation to reconnect, a gentle reminder that maybe the key you've been searching for isn't in the future, but in the now, in the simple and courageous act of accepting who you are, fully and completely. Now is the time to take the first step. Start applying these ideas today, and then share your experience with me in the comments. Tell me, which parts of this journey resonated the most with you? Your story might be the bridge that awakens something in someone else. And if you feel ready to go even deeper into this transformation, watch the video recommended above. It might be the next step in your expansion. See you in the next video.